The scream cut through the ballroom before Serafina Ashworth even understood what had been said. Every head turned. Every fan stopped waving. And in the center of it all stood her stepsister, Camilla, lips curled into a smile that did not reach her eyes. "The Duke is gay and impotent," Camilla announced, loud enough for the musicians to falter mid-note. "Everyone knows it. Poor Serafina is marrying a man who will never touch her. What a waste of a wedding gown." Laughter rippled through the crowd, sharp and cruel, the kind of laughter that lingers in a person's memory long after the sound fades. Serafina felt her face burn. She did not move. She did not cry. She had learned years ago that tears only fed Camilla's hunger. She searched the crowd for Duke Alastair Thorne, the man she was to marry in 3 days, but he was nowhere in sight. He had left the gathering early, as he often did, disappearing into whatever private world he kept locked away from everyone, including her. Serafina's mother had died when she was 12. Her father had remarried 2 years later, bringing Lady Vivienne and her daughter Camilla into their home. At first, Serafina had hoped for a sister, a friend, someone to share her grief with. Instead, she found herself competing for scraps of attention in a house that no longer felt like hers. When her father passed away last winter, the estate's debts became public knowledge almost overnight. Creditors circled like vultures. Lady Vivienne, desperate to protect what little status remained, had begun arranging a match for Camilla with any titled man who would have her. But it was Serafina who caught the eye of Duke Alastair Thorne, one of the wealthiest and most private men in the country. Camilla had never forgiven her for it. "You should say something," whispered Alina, Serafina's closest friend, tugging gently at her sleeve. Alina had known Serafina since childhood, since before the stepfamily, before the debts, before any of it. She was one of the few people who still looked at Serafina without judgment or calculation. "There is nothing to say," Serafina murmured. "Anything I say will only give her more to repeat tomorrow." She lifted her chin and walked through the crowd past the smirking guests, past Camilla's triumphant expression, past Lady Vivienne's carefully hidden satisfaction. She would not run. She would not hide. Whatever waited for her in this marriage, she would face it with her head held high, just as her mother had taught her. Outside, the night air was cool against her flushed skin. She found a quiet corner of the garden, away from the noise and the whispers, and allowed herself, finally, a single deep breath. "They talk a great deal for people who know nothing," said a voice behind her. Serafina turned sharply. A man stood a few feet away, dressed simply, without the ornamentation most nobles wore to such gatherings. She did not recognize him immediately in the dim light. "Forgive me," he said. "I did not mean to startle you." "You didn't," she lied. "Do I know you?" "Not yet," he said, and there was something in his voice, quiet and steady, that made her curious despite herself. "But you will." Before she could ask what he meant, he gave a small bow and walked back toward the house, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the distant hum of the party she had escaped. She did not know it then, but that brief exchange would matter more than she could imagine. The next morning, Serafina woke to the sound of Camilla's laughter drifting up from the breakfast room. She dressed slowly, dreading the day ahead. 3 days until the wedding. 3 days until she bound herself to a man she barely knew. A man the entire county now believed to be incapable of loving her in any way that mattered. She had met Duke Alastair Thorne only 4 times before their engagement was announced. He was polite in a distant sort of way, careful with his words, guarded with his expression. He never spoke of himself, never asked about her interests beyond the surface, never lingered in conversation longer than necessary. She had assumed at first that he simply found her unremarkable. Now, after Camilla's cruel announcement, she wondered if there was a different reason entirely. Was it true? Could it be true? And if it was, what kind of life awaited her, married to a man in name only, mocked by society, trapped in a house with no warmth and no future? She pushed the thought away as she entered the breakfast room, where Lady Vivienne sat with the composure of a queen, and Camilla picked at her food with obvious delight. "Sleep well, sister," Camilla asked sweetly. I imagine it's hard to sleep when your wedding is the talk of every drawing room in the city." "I slept fine," Serafina said, taking her seat with practiced calm. "The Duke's own cousin told me the rumors have followed him for years," Camilla continued, undeterred. "Apparently there was a scandal long ago, something about a broken engagement to a young lady who left him at the altar. No one ever learned the real reason." "Perhaps now we do." Lady Vivienne raised an eyebrow but said nothing to stop her daughter. She rarely did. Serafina kept her eyes on her plate. She would not give them the satisfaction of a reaction. But inside, a small seed of doubt had already taken root, and no amount of composure could stop it from growing. Later that day, a letter arrived from the Duke's estate. Serafina broke the seal with trembling fingers, half expecting an apology, half expecting nothing at all. Instead, it was a simple request. The Duke wished to see her alone before the wedding. He would call on her that afternoon. She spent the hours before his arrival pacing her room, rehearsing questions she was too afraid to ask, and answers she was not sure she wanted to hear. When his carriage finally arrived, she watched from her window as he stepped down, tall and composed, his expression unreadable as always. She met him in the small drawing room reserved for private visits, the one with the faded blue curtains her mother had chosen years ago. He bowed when he entered, formal as ever, and took the seat across from her without being asked. "You've heard the rumors," he said without preamble. Serafina's breath caught. She had not expected him to address it so directly. "The entire county has heard the rumors, Your Grace." "And do you believe them?" The question hung in the air between them. She studied his face, searching for something, anything, that might tell her the truth, but his expression remained as guarded as it always had been. "I don't know what to believe," she admitted finally. "You've told me very little about yourself, and now the little I do know is clouded by gossip I cannot verify." Something flickered across his face, gone before she could name it. "Fair enough," he said quietly. "I owe you more than silence, especially given what you're about to enter into, but I ask that you extend me a small measure of patience. Some things are not easily explained in an afternoon." "We are to be married in 2 days," Serafina said, her voice sharper than she intended. "I think I deserve more than patience. I deserve honesty." The Duke was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on some point beyond her shoulder, as though weighing how much of himself he was willing to give away. "You're right," he said at last. "You do." But before he could continue, a servant entered with news that pulled him away, urgent business regarding the estate that could not wait. He apologized, promised to return before the wedding with the answers she deserved, and left as quickly as he had arrived. Serafina sat alone in the drawing room long after his carriage had disappeared down the drive, turning his words over in her mind. He had not denied the rumors. He had not confirmed them either. He had simply asked for patience, as though the truth was too heavy to carry into a single conversation. That night she lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering what kind of man she was about to marry, and whether patience was a luxury she could afford when the entire world was already laughing behind her back. 2 days remained. 2 days before her life changed forever, one way or another. And somewhere beneath her fear, a small and stubborn part of her refused to believe that the man she had glimpsed in the garden, the one who had spoken to her so gently among the shadows, was the same man Camilla had painted with such careless cruelty. She did not yet know how right she was. The morning of the wedding arrived faster than Serafina expected, gray light creeping through her window like a warning. She had not slept. The Duke had not returned as promised, and no letter had come to explain his absence. She dressed in silence, her maid working quickly and quietly, sensing the tension that filled the room like smoke. Downstairs, the house buzzed with activity. Flowers arrived in great armfuls, their sweet smell almost sickening in the closed halls. Lady Vivienne barked orders at the staff, determined that nothing about this wedding would reflect poorly on her household, whatever her private feelings about the match. Camilla drifted through the chaos with an air of quiet amusement, watching Serafina the way a cat watches a bird it has already decided to catch. Nervous? Camilla asked, appearing in the doorway of Serafina's room just as the maid finished the final pins in her hair. Should I be? Serafina replied evenly. I would be in your position. Camilla stepped closer, her voice dropping to something almost gentle, almost kind, though Serafina knew better than to trust it. It isn't too late to call it off, you know. Mother could still find someone else for you, someone who actually wants a wife. I appreciate your concern, Serafina said, standing to face her fully. But I intend to keep my word, something you might try sometime. Camilla's smile faltered for just a moment before she recovered, turning on her heel and leaving without another word. Serafina exhaled slowly, steadying herself. Whatever waited for her at the altar, whatever truth or scandal lay beneath the surface of her marriage, she would not let her stepsister see her break. The carriage ride to the church felt endless. Serafina watched the city pass by the window, familiar streets suddenly strange, as though she were seeing them for the last time as the woman she used to be. By tonight, she would be a duchess. By tonight, the whole county would know whether Camilla's cruel words had been truth or lies. The church was full when she arrived, every pew packed with nobility eager to witness either a grand romance or a spectacular scandal. She heard the whispers the moment she stepped through the doors, felt the weight of 100 curious eyes as she walked down the aisle on the arm of her father's oldest friend, the closest thing to family willing to give her away. And there at the altar stood Duke Alastair Thorne. He looked different than she remembered, dressed in formal attire that suited him well, his dark hair combed back, his expression composed but not cold. As she approached, his eyes met hers, and for just a moment something passed between them that felt entirely private, entirely separate from the crowd of onlookers surrounding them. He offered his hand as she reached the altar, and she took it, surprised by the warmth of his grip, the steadiness of it. The ceremony proceeded in a blur of scripture and vows, words she had rehearsed 100 times in her mind, now falling from her lips with unexpected ease. When he spoke his own vows, his voice was low but clear, carrying through the silent church with quiet conviction. He did not rush through them the way some grooms did, eager to reach the end of a formality. He spoke each word as though he meant it, and Serafina found herself searching his face again, looking for the truth beneath the performance. At last they were pronounced husband and wife. The reception that followed was a grand affair, the finest the county had seen in years. Wine flowed freely, musicians played late into the evening, and guests danced beneath crystal chandeliers as though the earlier scandal had never touched this house at all. But Serafina noticed the sideways glances, the whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when she passed, the barely concealed curiosity in every eye that followed her and her new husband around the room. Camilla, for her part, seemed unable to contain herself. She danced with a wide smile, clearly enjoying every moment of speculation swirling through the crowd, occasionally catching Serafina's eye with a look that promised the night was far from over. Duke Alastair remained close to Serafina throughout the evening, his hand resting lightly at her back whenever they moved through the crowd together, his attention focused entirely on her despite the many nobles eager to speak with him. It was such a small thing, such a simple gesture, but it was more attention than he had shown her in all their previous meetings combined. "You seem surprised," he murmured at one point, leaning close enough that only she could hear. "I am," she admitted. "You've hardly left my side all evening." "Should I have?" "I confess I expected otherwise, given what everyone believes about our marriage." Something dark passed behind his eyes, gone as quickly as it appeared. "What people believe and what is true are rarely the same thing," he said quietly. "I promise you, before this night ends, you will understand." Before she could ask him to explain, Charlotte, one of Serafina's few genuine friends among the nobility, pulled her away for a dance, and the moment slipped past unresolved. As the evening wore on, the wine loosened tongues throughout the ballroom, and the whispers grew bolder, less careful about who might overhear. Serafina caught fragments of conversation as she moved through the crowd, cruel speculation about her wedding night, about what would or would not happen once the doors closed behind her and her husband. She tried not to let it show how deeply the words cut, but by the time the final dance ended and guests began preparing to leave, exhaustion and humiliation had worn her composure thin. Duke Alistair found her near the edge of the ballroom, watching the last of the guests depart. Camilla lingered nearby, pretending to gather her things while clearly straining to overhear whatever conversation might take place. "It's time," the Duke said quietly. "Are you ready?" Serafina lifted her chin, mustering whatever courage remained after the long, exhausting day. "As ready as I'll ever be." He offered his arm, and together they walked toward the private carriage waiting to take them to his estate, away from the prying eyes and cruel whispers of the city, toward whatever truth awaited her behind the closed doors of her new home. The carriage ride was quiet, neither of them speaking as the city gave way to countryside, the noise and light of the wedding fading behind them. Serafina watched her husband in the dim lantern light, studying his profile, trying once again to understand the man she had bound herself to. "You said I would understand by the end of tonight," she said finally, breaking the silence. "I would rather understand now than continue wondering." The Duke turned to look at her, and for the first time since she had met him, his careful composure seemed to slip, revealing something underneath, something tired and worn and achingly human. "There are things about my past that I have never spoken of publicly," he said slowly. "Things that shaped the rumors you heard, though not in the way you might imagine. I did not want to burden you with them before we were bound together, but I see now that silence has only made things worse." "Then tell me," Serafina said softly. "Whatever it is, I would rather know the truth than continue imagining the worst." He was quiet for a long moment, watching the dark countryside pass by the window before he finally began to speak, his voice low and measured, as though each word cost him something to release. "6 years ago I was engaged to another woman," he said. "Her name was Margaret. Our families arranged the match, much like ours, though I confess I had grown genuinely fond of her by the time our wedding approached. 2 weeks before we were to marry, she disappeared." Serafina's breath caught. "Disappeared." "She left in the middle of the night, taking nothing but a small bag and a letter addressed to me. In it she confessed that she had fallen in love with someone else, a man of no title and no fortune, and that she could not bring herself to marry me knowing her heart belonged elsewhere." He paused, his jaw tightening. "I never saw her again, but the scandal that followed nearly destroyed my family's reputation. Rumors spread quickly, each one wilder than the last, and eventually they settled on an explanation that seemed to satisfy everyone's curiosity without implicating Margaret at all. They said the fault was yours," Serafina finished quietly, understanding dawning at last. "They said you were the reason the marriage failed." "Yes," he said simply, "and once that rumor took hold, it never truly left me. Every match that followed carried the same whispers, the same doubts. I stopped trying to explain myself years ago. It seemed easier to let people believe what they wished than to relive that humiliation again and again." Serafina studied his face in the dim light, seeing him now with new eyes, understanding the guardedness she had mistaken for indifference, the careful distance she had mistaken for disinterest. "Why tell me now?" she asked. "You could have let me believe whatever I wished the same as everyone else." "Because you are my wife," he said, meeting her eyes directly for the first time that night. "And because I intend for our marriage to be built on something more honest than the arrangement that brought us together. Whatever else happens between us, I did not want you to spend our wedding night wondering if the rumors were true." The carriage rolled to a stop outside his estate, a grand house lit softly by lanterns along the drive, but neither of them moved to leave immediately. Serafina sat with his words settling over her, feeling something shift inside her chest, something that had been braced for disappointment now cautiously, tentatively, allowing itself to hope. "Thank you for telling me," she said finally. "I know it could not have been easy." "It wasn't," he admitted, "but you deserved better than silence, especially after what your stepsister said. I only wish I had spoken sooner, before the rumor had time to take root in your mind." They sat together in the quiet of the carriage a moment longer, the weight of his confession settling between them, before he finally opened the door and helped her down, leading her toward the house that would now be her home. But as they crossed the threshold together, Serafina could not shake the feeling that his story, however honest, was only the beginning of what she needed to understand about the man she had married. There was still the matter of the rumor itself, of how it had reached Camilla's ears so precisely, so cruelly timed to cause the maximum damage on the night before her wedding. Someone had told Camilla exactly what to say, and exactly when to say it. And Serafina intended to find out who. The house was quiet as they stepped inside, the staff having retired for the night on the Duke's earlier instructions, leaving the newlyweds alone in the vast entrance hall. Candlelight flickered against the high ceilings, casting long shadows across portraits of ancestors Serafina did not yet know, faces that would soon become as familiar to her as her own family once had been. "I know this is not the wedding night either of us imagined," Alistair said, leading her toward the drawing room rather than the bedchambers upstairs. "But I would rather we spend it talking than pretending everything between us is settled and simple." Serafina followed him, grateful, though she would not have admitted it aloud, for the reprieve from expectations she had dreaded all evening. The drawing room was warm, a fire already burning low in the hearth, two chairs arranged close together as though he had planned this quiet conversation before they ever left the church. "Tell me about the man Margaret loved," Serafina said, settling into the chair across from him. "You said he had no title and no fortune. How did such a match come about in the first place?" Alistair's expression darkened slightly. "He was a tutor, hired to teach mathematics to my younger cousin. Margaret met him during visits to my family's estate, before our engagement was even announced. I did not know of the attachment until it was far too late to matter." "Do you know what became of them?" "For years I did not. I made a point of not searching, of not allowing myself to dwell on what I could not change." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "But recently, circumstances have forced me to reconsider that decision." Serafina leaned forward slightly, sensing there was more to this story than he had yet revealed. "What circumstances?" "Before I answer that, I need to ask you something," Alistair said, his tone shifting, growing more serious. "How well do you know your stepmother's history? Before she married your father, I mean." The question caught Serafina off guard. "Not well at all. She rarely speaks of her life before joining our household. I know she was widowed once before, and that her first husband left her with very little, which is part of why my father's fortune appealed to her so strongly. Beyond that, I know almost nothing." Alistair was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire as though weighing how much to reveal. "Her first husband's name was Edmund Whitmore," he said finally. "He was a tutor before he married her, employed by a wealthy family in the north." Serafina felt something cold settle in her stomach. "You cannot mean—" "I do not know for certain," Alistair admitted. "But the timing, the description, the profession, it all aligns too closely to dismiss as coincidence. I believe your stepmother's first husband may have been the same man Margaret ran away with all those years ago." The room seemed to grow smaller around Serafina as she absorbed this possibility. "But if that's true, then Lady Vivienne would have known Margaret. She might have even known the truth about what happened to her, about the scandal that followed you for years. Which would explain why the rumor Camilla spread at your engagement party matched the old story so precisely," Alistair said grimly. "Not gay and impotent by accident, Serafina. Someone crafted that particular cruelty, knowing exactly what old wound it would reopen for me, and exactly how effectively it would humiliate you in front of the entire county." Serafina sat back, her mind racing through years of small cruelties, offhand comments, moments she had dismissed as ordinary jealousy but now saw in a darker light. "Lady Vivienne has always resented that I caught your attention instead of Camilla, but this feels like more than simple resentment. This feels calculated." "I agree," Alistair said. "Which is why I have spent the past several weeks quietly investigating your stepmother's history, hoping to understand what I was truly marrying into before our wedding day arrived. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I had no proof, only suspicion, and I did not want to accuse your family of something so serious without solid ground beneath my words. I still don't have everything I need. But tonight, watching Camilla's satisfaction as she humiliated you in front of everyone, I became certain that whatever game she and her mother are playing, it goes far deeper than ordinary spite. Serafina stood and walked toward the window, looking out at the dark grounds beyond, trying to organize the flood of information into something she could understand. What do they gain from destroying our marriage? Even if the rumor were true, even if you truly could not, what would that accomplish for them beyond embarrassment? An annulment, Alistair said quietly. If our marriage were never consummated, and if the reason became public enough, it could be dissolved. Your family's debts would return in full, and your stepmother would be free to pursue a match for Camilla instead, perhaps with me directly, once the scandal settled and enough time had passed to make such a thing seem respectable again. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. She's been planning this from the beginning, long before the wedding, maybe even before the engagement was announced. I believe so, Alistair said. Which is why I asked for your patience earlier, and why I chose tonight to share what I know, rather than allowing you to continue believing the rumor might be true. We are not merely victims of ordinary gossip, Serafina. We are targets of a deliberate scheme, and I intend to uncover its full extent before your stepmother and stepsister can do any further damage. Serafina turned back to face him, a new determination hardening in her chest. Then let me help you. I have lived in that house for years. I know things about Lady Vivienne and Camilla that even careful investigation might miss. Small habits, old letters, connections you would never think to look for. Alistair studied her for a long moment, something like admiration flickering across his usually guarded expression. I had not expected you to offer assistance so readily. You married me expecting a quiet, obedient wife who would accept whatever explanation you offered and ask no further questions, Serafina said, a small smile tugging at the corner of her mouth despite the seriousness of the conversation. I think by now you understand that is not who I am. No, he agreed, something warm entering his voice for the first time that evening. I am beginning to understand that quite clearly. They talked long into the night, piecing together fragments of memory and observation that, taken individually, meant little, but together painted an increasingly troubling picture. Serafina recalled letters Lady Vivienne received regularly from an address she never explained, always opened in private, always burned in the fireplace once read. She remembered Camilla's sudden knowledge of details about the Duke's past that no one outside his immediate family should have known, details that now made sense if Lady Vivienne truly had once been connected to Margaret and her mysterious tutor husband. There's something else, Serafina said suddenly, a memory surfacing that she had not thought of in years. When I was younger, shortly after my father married Lady Vivienne, I overheard her speaking with someone in the garden. I did not understand it at the time, but she mentioned a name, Whitmore. I remember because it struck me as unusual, and I asked my father about it later. He told me it was nothing, an old friend from her past, and I never thought of it again. That confirms it, Alistair said grimly. Whatever connection exists between your stepmother and Edmund Whitmore, it did not end when Margaret disappeared. She has maintained contact with him, or at least with news of him, for years. Do you think he is still alive, still nearby? I don't know, Alistair admitted, but I intend to find out. If Edmund Whitmore can be located, he may be able to confirm what truly happened to Margaret, and more importantly, he may reveal exactly what role your stepmother has played in orchestrating this entire scheme against us. As the fire burned low and exhaustion finally began to overtake the adrenaline of revelation, Alistair rose and extended his hand toward Serafina. It's late. Whatever we uncover, we will need clear minds to face it properly. Come, let me show you to your chambers. Serafina took his hand, allowing him to lead her up the grand staircase toward the private wing of the house. At the door to her new bedchamber, He paused, his expression softening into something gentler than the careful composure he had maintained all evening. "Thank you for trusting me with your questions tonight," he said quietly, "and for offering to help despite everything. I know this is not the beginning either of us imagined for our marriage." "Perhaps not," Serafina said, "but I find I would rather face something true and difficult together than something false and easy alone." Something shifted in his expression, warm and unguarded, and for a moment she thought he might close the distance between them entirely. Instead, he simply bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect rather than formality. "Sleep well, Serafina," he said. "Tomorrow we begin uncovering the truth in earnest." She watched him retreat down the hallway toward his own chambers, and as she finally closed her door and prepared for sleep, she found that despite the unsettling revelations of the evening, despite the scheme that had apparently shadowed her entire life without her knowledge, she felt something she had not expected to feel on her wedding night. She felt less alone than she had in years. But sleep did not come easily. Her mind turned over every detail Alistair had shared, every memory she had dredged up from her own past, searching for anything that might have hinted at the depth of Lady Vivienne's deception. She thought of her father, gentle and trusting, who had never once suspected his second wife of harboring secrets so carefully buried. She thought of Camilla, whose cruelty had always seemed like simple jealousy, but which now appeared to be something far more deliberate, perhaps even something she had been groomed for since childhood. And she thought of Margaret, a woman she had never met, whose disappearance had shaped Alistair's entire adult life, whose fate remained unknown even now. What had truly happened to her? Had she found happiness with Edmund Whitmore, wherever they had gone? Or had something darker befallen her, something that Lady Vivienne's continued secrecy suggested she might know more about than anyone realized? Serafina finally drifted into uneasy sleep as the first hints of dawn began to color the sky outside her window. Her dreams filled with half-formed images of locked drawers, burned letters, and a woman's face she had never seen but somehow felt she needed desperately to find. She woke only a few hours later to the sound of urgent voices downstairs, and the distinct feeling that whatever quiet investigation she and Alistair had planned to conduct carefully and patiently was about to be forced into motion far sooner than either of them had anticipated. Serafina dressed quickly, her heart pounding as she hurried down the grand staircase toward the sound of raised voices. In the entrance hall, she found Alistair speaking with a man she did not recognize, older, weathered, dressed in the plain clothes of a traveler rather than the fine attire of nobility. Beside them stood William, the Duke's most trusted steward, his face grave with concern. "What's happening?" Serafina asked, drawing all three men's attention. Alistair turned to her, his expression a careful mask that did not quite hide the tension underneath. "Serafina, this is Nathaniel Cross. He arrived early this morning with news I did not expect to receive so soon." Nathaniel bowed slightly. "Your Grace, my apologies for the early hour, but I felt this could not wait." "What news?" Serafina pressed, moving closer. Alistair hesitated only a moment before answering. "Nathaniel works for a solicitor's office in the city, one I engaged several weeks ago to search for information about Edmund Whitmore. He has found him." Serafina's breath caught. "Already so quickly?" "It seems Mr. Whitmore has not been hiding as carefully as we assumed," Nathaniel said. "He lives under his own name, in fact, in a small village less than a day's ride from here. He works as a schoolmaster." "And Margaret?" Alistair asked, his voice tight with a question he had clearly been carrying for years. Nathaniel's expression grew somber. According to village records, a woman matching her description lived with him for several years after his arrival. She passed away 3 winters ago. Illness, according to the local physician's notes. There is no record of what became of Mr. Whitmore's connection to your family after that, Your Grace, but he has remained in the village ever since, apparently alone. The news settled over the room like a heavy weight. Serafina watched Alistair's face carefully, searching for grief, for anger, for any emotion that might reveal how deeply this news affected him after so many years of uncertainty. But his expression remained composed, though his hands, she noticed, had curled into fists at his sides. "Thank you, Nathaniel," Alastair said finally. "You've done excellent work. I would like to speak with Mr. Whitmore myself as soon as it can be arranged." "Of course, Your Grace. I can have a carriage ready within the hour if you wish." "I do." Alastair turned to Seraphina. "Will you come with me? I know this is not how either of us imagined spending the day after our wedding, but I would value your presence and your instincts if we are to learn anything useful from this man." "Of course I'll come," Seraphina said without hesitation. "This concerns both of us now." As Nathaniel departed to arrange the carriage, Seraphina touched Alastair's arm gently, drawing his attention. "Are you all right? Learning of Margaret's death after all these years, it cannot be easy news to receive." Something flickered across his face, brief but genuine. "I grieved for her a long time ago when she first disappeared. I think, in some strange way, I grieved twice over, once for the woman I thought I would marry, and once more for the friendship we had before circumstances complicated everything between us. Learning of her death now feels less like fresh grief, and more like the closing of a door I had left open far too long." "And Edmund Whitmore, what do you hope to learn from him?" "The truth," Alastair said simply. "About what truly happened between them, about whatever connection remains to your stepmother, and about why someone would use that old, painful history as a weapon against us now, so many years later." They departed within the hour, the carriage rattling along country roads as the morning sun climbed higher in the sky. Seraphina watched the passing countryside, her mind still turning over the strange coincidences that had brought them to this point. A rumor spoken cruelly at a party, a stepmother's hidden past, a dead woman whose story had shaped a duke's entire adult life, and now a schoolmaster who might hold the final pieces of a puzzle neither of them had asked to solve. The village, when they arrived, was small and unremarkable, the kind of place travelers passed through without a second glance. Nathaniel had provided directions to the schoolhouse, a modest building at the edge of the village green, where children's voices could be heard reciting lessons even from outside. They waited until the school day ended, watching from a discreet distance as children filed out and dispersed toward their homes, before finally approaching the building. A man emerged shortly after the last child departed, tall and gray-haired, his posture slightly stooped from years of bending over student work, but his eyes sharp and alert as he noticed the finely dressed couple approaching. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice cautious. "Mr. Whitmore?" Alastair asked. "Edmund Whitmore." The man's expression shifted immediately, wariness replacing curiosity. "Who's asking?" "My name is Alastair Thorne," the Duke said quietly. "I believe you once knew a woman named Margaret." Edmund's face went pale, and for a moment, Seraphina thought he might turn and flee back into the schoolhouse. Instead, he seemed to deflate slightly, years of carefully maintained composure crumbling all at once. "I wondered if this day would come eventually," he said quietly. "You'd better come inside." The schoolhouse was simple but tidy, rows of small desks arranged before a larger one where Edmund clearly conducted his lessons. He gestured for them to sit on a bench near the window while he remained standing, arms crossed, as though bracing himself for whatever conversation was about to unfold. "I know Margaret passed away," Alastair said gently. "I'm sorry for your loss, whatever the years may have done to complicate our history." Edmund's composure cracked slightly at the mention of her death. 3 years now. It feels both longer and shorter than that, depending on the day. "I'm not here to relitigate old grievances," Alastair continued. "I'm here because someone has taken the story of what happened between us and used it as a weapon, and I believe you may know who." Edmund's eyes narrowed slightly. "What do you mean?" "A woman named Vivienne," Seraphina said, speaking for the first time since entering the schoolhouse. "My stepmother. She spread rumors about my husband before our wedding, rumors that seemed to echo the scandal surrounding Margaret's disappearance far too closely to be coincidence. We believe she knew Margaret, or perhaps knew you, and used that knowledge deliberately to sabotage our marriage. Edmund's face went through a complicated series of emotions before finally settling into something resigned. Vivienne Ashworth, he said slowly. Yes, I know that name. Margaret and I stayed with her for a time, shortly after we left the Thorne estate. She and Margaret had been friends since childhood, distant cousins on their mothers' sides, though the family connection was rarely discussed. Vivienne offered us shelter when we had nowhere else to go, at least until Margaret's family disowned her for the scandal, and mine had little enough to offer in the first place. Serafina felt something cold settle in her stomach. Distant cousins. A connection she had never known existed, hidden away like every other secret Lady Vivienne seemed to carry. Did Vivienne know the full story? Alistair asked. About why Margaret left, about the scandal that followed. She knew everything, Edmund said. Margaret confided in her completely during those difficult months. I remember Vivienne being furious on Margaret's behalf, furious at how quickly the nobility turned the story around, painting you as the wounded party while Margaret bore the full weight of scandal and disgrace. He paused, his expression darkening further. But I also remember something else, something that troubled me even then. Vivienne seemed almost pleased by your downfall, Your Grace, more pleased than simple loyalty to a friend would explain. Pleased how? Serafina pressed. She had wanted to marry into your family herself, years before Margaret's engagement was ever announced, Edmund said. I don't know the full details, something about an arrangement that fell through when your father chose a different match for you, one considered more advantageous for the estate. Vivienne never forgave the slight, though she rarely spoke of it directly. When Margaret's scandal broke and your reputation suffered as a result, I remember Vivienne saying it was no less than your family deserved. The pieces clicked together with sickening finality. This was not simply about Camilla's jealousy, or even about Vivienne's ambition for her daughter's future. This was old, personal resentment, carried for years, waiting patiently for an opportunity to strike at the Thorne family through whatever means presented themselves. She married my father not long after that, Serafina said quietly, working through the timeline in her mind. Perhaps she saw an opportunity, a way to remain connected to families with wealth and standing, even after losing her chance with the Thorne family directly. And when you caught my attention instead of Camilla, Alistair added grimly, old wounds reopened and old plans found new purpose. Edmund watched the exchange with growing understanding. You believe she orchestrated the rumors deliberately, using the old scandal as a template. We believe so, Alistair confirmed. And we believe her ultimate goal is to see our marriage dissolved, freeing me to pursue a match with Camilla instead, while restoring whatever social and financial advantage she originally hoped to secure through connection to my family. Edmund was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the empty schoolyard beyond. I owe Margaret's memory the truth, whatever comfort or difficulty it brings, he said finally. I would be willing to provide a written account of everything I've told you today, if it would help you counter whatever scheme this woman has constructed. Margaret deserved better than to have her story twisted into a weapon against innocent people, especially after everything she suffered because of that scandal in the first place. Thank you, Alistair said, genuine gratitude evident in his voice. That would mean a great deal, both for our situation and for finally putting the old rumors to rest, honestly and completely. As Edmund retrieved paper and ink to begin drafting his account, Serafina found herself watching Alistair carefully, noting the tension finally beginning to ease from his shoulders. The weight of years of unexplained scandal finally beginning to lift now that the truth was coming into focus. Are you all right? She asked quietly, echoing her earlier question from that morning. I think for the first time in a very long while I actually am, Alistair admitted. Thank you for insisting on coming with me today. I don't think I could have faced this conversation alone. We're partners now, Serafina said simply. Whatever this marriage began as, I intend for us to face whatever comes together honestly from this point forward. Something warm passed across his expression, and this time he did not hold back the small smile that followed. I find myself very glad to hear you say that. They remained at the schoolhouse until Edmund finished his written account, detailing everything he had shared, along with additional information about Vivienne's early friendship with Margaret and the resentment she had carried regarding her own failed prospects with the Thorne family years earlier. It was, Alistair explained on their carriage ride home, exactly the kind of evidence they needed to confront Lady Vivienne directly, to expose her scheme before it could cause any further damage to their marriage or their reputations. But as the carriage rolled back toward the estate, the afternoon sun beginning its slow descent toward evening, Seraphina could not shake a growing sense of unease. If Lady Vivienne had been planning this scheme for years, patiently waiting for the right opportunity to strike, she would not simply accept defeat once confronted with evidence of her own manipulation. Whatever came next, Seraphina suspected, would not come easily. They arrived back at the estate as evening settled over the countryside, the sky streaked with orange and violet, the air cool with the promise of night. William met them at the door with news that immediately dampened whatever relief the day's discoveries had provided. "Your Grace, Lady Vivienne and her daughter arrived less than an hour ago," he said, his voice carefully neutral in the way trained staff learned to manage difficult news. "They insisted on waiting for your return, claiming it concerned a family matter too urgent to delay." Seraphina exchanged a glance with Alistair, unease settling heavily between them. "Did they say anything else?" "Only that they wished to discuss the terms of your marriage settlement, Your Grace," William said, addressing Seraphina directly. Lady Vivienne seemed quite insistent that certain arrangements needed clarification, given the circumstances surrounding the wedding. Alistair's jaw tightened. "They're moving faster than I anticipated." "They sense something has changed," Seraphina said quietly. "Perhaps they learned we left the estate today, and worry we're gathering information they'd rather keep buried." "Then let's not keep them waiting any longer," Alistair said, squaring his shoulders with quiet determination. "Whatever they've come to discuss, I think it's time we discuss the truth instead." They found Lady Vivienne and Camilla in the drawing room, seated with the practiced comfort of women who believed themselves entirely in control of the situation. Camilla's eyes lit with malicious curiosity as Seraphina and Alistair entered, clearly hoping to witness some fresh scandal or humiliation unfold before the evening ended. "Your Grace," Lady Vivienne said, rising with a shallow curtsy that carried more performance than genuine respect. "Forgive our unannounced visit, but I felt certain matters required immediate attention." "What matters precisely?" Alistair asked, his tone carefully measured, giving away nothing of what he and Seraphina had learned that day. "The marriage settlement," Lady Vivienne said smoothly. "Given the rather public nature of the rumors surrounding your reputation, Your Grace, I felt it prudent to ensure certain protections remain in place for Seraphina, should circumstances require reconsideration of the arrangement in the future." "Reconsideration," Seraphina repeated flatly. "You mean annulment?" Lady Vivienne's composed expression flickered, just slightly, at Seraphina's directness. "I mean only to protect my stepdaughter's interests, dear. Surely you cannot fault a mother's concern." "You are not my mother," Seraphina said, her voice steady despite the tremor of anger building beneath her composure. "And your concern has never once, in all the years you've lived in my family's house, been for my interests. It has always been for your own." Camilla's smile faltered slightly, sensing the shift in tone, the confidence that had not existed in Seraphina before today. "I don't know what's gotten into you," Lady Vivienne said, her voice cooling considerably. "But I would advise caution before making accusations you cannot support." "Edmund Whitmore sends his regards," Alistair said quietly. The room went completely still. Lady Vivienne's face, for the first time since Seraphina had known her, drained entirely of color. "I don't know who that is," she said, but her voice wavered, betraying the lie even as she spoke it. "I think you do," Alistair continued, his voice hardening. "I think you knew him quite well along with Margaret before her scandal destroyed both our reputations 6 years ago. I think you've harbored resentment toward my family ever since your own hopes of marrying into it were dashed, long before Margaret's engagement was even announced. And I think you saw an opportunity, when Serafina caught my attention instead of Camilla, to finally exact whatever revenge you've been planning for years. This is absurd, Lady Vivienne said, though her voice had lost much of its earlier confidence. Whatever wild story you've concocted. We have a written account, Serafina interrupted, from Edmund Whitmore himself, detailing your friendship with Margaret, your knowledge of the scandal, and your bitterness toward the Thorne family. We also have record of Margaret's passing, and clear evidence that the rumor Camilla spread at our engagement party matches the old scandal far too precisely to be coincidence. Camilla's eyes darted toward her mother, uncertainty finally cracking through her earlier confidence. Mother, what is she talking about? Lady Vivienne's carefully constructed composure finally shattered entirely. Years of hidden resentment spilling out in a rush of words, she seemed unable to fully control. You have no idea what that family cost me, she snapped, turning her fury toward Alistair. I loved your father once, did you know that? Before he chose your mother instead for her fortune, for connections that meant nothing beyond ledgers and land deeds. I was cast aside for a better arrangement, and I never forgot the humiliation of it. So you married my father instead, Serafina said slowly, pieces continuing to click into place. Not for love, but for proximity, waiting for an opportunity to finally settle old scores. Your father was a good man, Lady Vivienne said, something almost like genuine regret flickering across her expression before hardening once more into resolve. But yes, I confess the connection to your family's remaining status appealed to me, especially once I learned of your growing acquaintance with Duke Thorne. It seemed almost providential, an opportunity I had waited years to receive. And when Camilla failed to capture his attention instead of me, Serafina continued, you decided to destroy the match entirely, rather than allow either of us happiness you felt you'd been denied. I decided, Lady Vivienne said coldly, that if I could not have what I once wanted, then neither of you deserved it either. Call it petty if you wish. I call it justice, long overdue. Camilla, still visibly reeling from the revelation of her mother's manipulation, finally found her voice. You used me, she said quietly, her earlier malice replaced by something rawer, more vulnerable. You told me the rumor was simple truth, common knowledge among the servants. You never told me it was a lie you constructed deliberately, built on some old grudge I knew nothing about. I told you what you needed to know to play your part, Lady Vivienne said sharply, unmoved by her daughter's distress. My part, Camilla repeated, something breaking in her expression. I humiliated Serafina in front of the entire county because you asked me to, because I believed I was simply speaking an unfortunate truth everyone already suspected. You let me believe that. Enough, Alistair said firmly, cutting through the escalating family conflict with quiet authority. Whatever grievances exist between the three of you, the matter before us now is clear. Lady Vivienne, you have deliberately spread false rumors intended to damage my reputation and sabotage my marriage, motivated by resentment carried for years over a personal disappointment entirely unrelated to either Serafina or myself. This is not simply cruel gossip. This borders on actionable slander, and I have both the evidence and the standing to pursue whatever consequences I deem appropriate. Lady Vivienne's earlier defiance finally crumbled beneath the weight of Alistair's calm but unmistakable authority. What do you intend to do? She asked, her voice smaller now than Serafina had ever heard it. That remains to be decided, Alistair said. But I would advise you to consider very carefully how you conduct yourself from this point forward. Your daughter, at least, appears to have been an unwitting participant in your scheme, manipulated by a mother she trusted to guide her honestly. I am inclined towards some measure of understanding regarding her role, provided she demonstrates genuine remorse and cooperation moving forward. You, however, have earned no such consideration. The room fell into tense silence, Lady Vivienne's face a mixture of fury and dawning fear as she recognized the full weight of consequences now bearing down upon her. Camilla stood apart from her mother, arms wrapped around herself, looking younger and more uncertain than Serafina had ever seen her. "Serafina," Camilla said quietly, turning to face her stepsister directly. "I am sorry. I know that means very little now, given everything that's happened, but I truly did not know the full extent of what my mother had planned. I believed I was simply telling an unfortunate truth, exposing something everyone already suspected." Serafina studied her stepsister's face, searching for sincerity beneath years of accumulated resentment and cruelty. She found, somewhat to her surprise, that she believed her, at least in this moment. "I don't know if I can forgive what happened at the engagement party," Serafina said honestly. "The humiliation of that night will stay with me for a long time. But I recognize now that you were not the true architect of this scheme, merely an instrument used by someone who should have protected you rather than manipulated you." Camilla's eyes filled with tears she seemed to fight against showing. "What happens now?" "That depends on you," Alistair said. "If you're willing to provide a full account of your mother's instructions, to help us understand the complete scope of her scheme, I would be willing to consider more lenient treatment regarding your own involvement." Camilla nodded quickly, desperate for any path away from her mother's fate. "I'll tell you everything I know." Lady Vivienne watched her daughter's betrayal with an expression of bitter resignation, seeming to finally understand that whatever control she had once held over her carefully constructed scheme had entirely slipped away. "This isn't over," she said quietly, though the threat carried little of its earlier weight. "Families like yours always find ways to bury inconvenient truths, Your Grace. Don't imagine your victory tonight comes without cost." "Perhaps not," Alistair said evenly. "But I would rather face whatever cost comes from exposing the truth than continue living beneath the weight of rumors and half-truths that have shaped my life for far too long already." As William and additional staff arrived to escort Lady Vivienne from the estate pending further decisions about how best to address her actions, Serafina found herself standing beside Alistair in the now quiet drawing room, the weight of the day's revelations finally settling fully upon her. "That was not how I expected to spend our first full day of marriage," she said, a note of exhausted humor entering her voice despite everything. "No," Alistair agreed, a small smile finally breaking through his earlier tension. "But I find I would rather face difficult truths alongside you than continue living comfortably within convenient lies." Camilla remained in the drawing room as well, watching the exchange between them with an expression Serafina could not quite read, something between longing and regret. "What will happen to me now?" Camilla asked quietly. "That depends on how honestly you help us understand the full scope of your mother's scheme," Alistair said. "But I suspect, given everything we've learned today, that your future no longer needs to be shaped entirely by her ambitions and resentments. Perhaps this is an opportunity to build something more honest for yourself as well." Camilla said nothing in response, but something in her expression shifted, a small crack of hope breaking through years of manipulation and inherited bitterness. As the household finally settled into quiet that evening, the immediate crisis addressed if not entirely resolved, Serafina found herself reflecting on how dramatically the past 2 days had transformed her understanding of everything she thought she knew, about her family, about her marriage, and about the man she had bound herself to with such uncertainty just 24 hours earlier. Whatever challenges remained ahead, she felt, for the first time in longer than she could remember, that she was facing them honestly, and that she was not facing them alone. 3 days passed in relative quiet, though Serafina soon learned that quiet, where Lady Vivienne was concerned, rarely meant surrender. She had returned to her own household after that confrontation, humiliated but not yet defeated, and Serafina suspected her stepmother was far too proud to accept such a loss without some final attempt at retaliation. That attempt arrived on the 4th morning, in the form of an invitation delivered to nearly every prominent household in the county. Lady Vivienne was hosting a gathering, ostensibly to celebrate the recent marriage of her stepdaughter, though Serafina recognized immediately that no genuine celebration lay behind such an invitation. "She's planning something," Serafina said, studying the elegant card with growing unease. This isn't a celebration, it's an opportunity. Alistair read the invitation over her shoulder, his expression thoughtful. An opportunity for what exactly? I don't know, Serafina admitted. But knowing her, it will involve public humiliation of some kind, an attempt to salvage her reputation by damaging ours further, or perhaps an effort to plant new doubts before word of our discoveries spreads too widely through the county. Then we attend, Alistair said firmly. Whatever she intends, I would rather face it directly than allow her the satisfaction of striking while we remain unprepared. Serafina studied her husband's determined expression, feeling a surge of gratitude for the partnership that had grown between them so unexpectedly over the past several days. Whatever uncertainty had defined the beginning of their marriage, it had been replaced by something far more solid, forged through shared adversity and honest conversation. There's something else we should consider, she said slowly, an idea beginning to form. If Lady Vivienne intends to use this gathering as an opportunity for further scandal, perhaps we should use it as an opportunity of our own. Alistair raised an eyebrow, curious. What did you have in mind? The entire county witnessed her cruelty at our engagement party, Serafina said. They heard the rumor she orchestrated through Camilla, and many of them likely still believe there's truth to it, however quietly they might speculate. If we wait for her to strike first, we remain forever on the defensive, always responding to whatever fresh cruelty she constructs. But if we address the truth directly, publicly, before she has the chance to twist the narrative any further, we take that power away from her entirely. Understanding dawned across Alistair's face. You're suggesting we make our own declaration at her gathering, before whatever scheme she's planned can unfold. Exactly, Serafina said. Turn her own event into the moment the truth finally comes to light, on our terms rather than hers. Alistair was quiet for a moment, considering the boldness of the plan, before a slow smile spread across his features. I find myself continually surprised by you, Serafina. I married a woman I barely knew, expecting perhaps a quiet, cautious partnership. Instead, I find myself married to someone entirely capable of turning our enemy's own scheme back against her. Is that a complaint? Serafina asked, a teasing note entering her voice for the first time in days. Quite the opposite, Alistair said warmly. I find it rather remarkable, actually. They spent the following days preparing carefully, gathering additional evidence, coordinating with Nathaniel to ensure Edmund Whitmore's written account remained properly documented and ready to present if needed, and reaching out quietly to a small number of trusted allies within the nobility who might lend credibility to whatever revelations the gathering would bring. Charlotte, upon learning the full truth of Lady Vivienne's scheme, offered her immediate and enthusiastic support. I always suspected there was something unnatural about the timing of that rumor, she told Serafina during a private visit. It struck too precisely, too perfectly designed to cause maximum damage. I'm only sorry I didn't push harder to understand the truth sooner. Even Camilla, in the days following her confrontation with her mother, proved surprisingly cooperative, providing additional details about Lady Vivienne's instructions and the careful timing she had orchestrated to ensure the rumor reached its peak effectiveness right before the wedding. Whatever bitter rivalry had once defined their relationship, Serafina found herself developing something unexpected toward her stepsister, not quite friendship, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. I want to attend the gathering as well, Camilla said during one such conversation. If my mother intends to use this event to salvage her reputation through further deception, I would rather stand against her publicly than remain complicit through silence. Are you certain? Serafina asked. It will not be easy standing against your own mother in front of the entire county. Nothing about the past several days has been easy, Camilla said quietly. But I think I would rather face difficulty honestly than continue living comfortably within a lie I now understand far too well. The evening of the gathering arrived with a tension. Serafina could feel humming beneath the surface of every polite greeting and carefully maintained smile. Lady Vivienne's estate had been transformed for the occasion, decorated lavishly, musicians playing cheerful melodies that felt entirely at odds with the underlying currents of anticipation and suspicion running through the assembled guests. Lady Vivienne greeted them at the entrance with a composure that betrayed nothing of the confrontation days earlier, though Serafina noticed a slight tightness around her eyes, a wariness that suggested she understood this evening might not unfold entirely according to her plans. "Your Grace, Serafina," she said smoothly, "how wonderful that you could join us this evening. I do hope we can put recent unpleasantness behind us and celebrate your union properly, as befits your standing." "We look forward to it," Alastair said evenly, giving nothing away. They moved through the gathering with careful patience, greeting familiar faces, exchanging polite conversation, all while watching for whatever moment Lady Vivienne had planned to strike. It came nearly 2 hours into the evening when Lady Vivienne rose before the assembled guests, tapping her glass gently to draw attention. "Friends," she began, her voice carrying easily through the ballroom, "I wish to gather you all tonight not simply to celebrate my stepdaughter's marriage, but to address certain unfortunate rumors that have circulated recently, rumors that I fear have caused undue distress to both my family and to the Duke's reputation." Serafina felt Alastair's hand find hers, steadying, as they waited to hear how Lady Vivienne intended to twist the situation to her advantage. "It has come to my attention," Lady Vivienne continued, "that certain parties have suggested I orchestrated cruel gossip regarding the Duke's character, motivated by some imagined personal grudge. I stand before you tonight to assure you all that such accusations are entirely without merit, born perhaps from misunderstanding, or perhaps from more troubling motives I would rather not speculate upon publicly." Whispers rippled through the crowd, curious eyes turning toward Serafina and Alastair, waiting to see how they would respond to such a direct, public challenge. "Actually," Alastair said, his voice calm but carrying clearly through the suddenly quiet room, "I think it's time the truth of this matter was addressed directly, rather than left to continued speculation and misunderstanding." He stepped forward, and Serafina moved with him, their united presence drawing every eye in the room. "6 years ago," Alastair began, "I was engaged to a woman named Margaret, a match arranged between our families that ended when she chose to leave with a man she had fallen in love with, a tutor named Edmund Whitmore. The scandal that followed shaped my reputation for years afterward, though the truth of what happened was never fully understood by society at large." He paused, letting the weight of this admission settle over the room before continuing. "What most of you do not know," he continued, "is that Lady Vivienne was well acquainted with both Margaret and Edmund during that period. In fact, she sheltered them for a time after Margaret's family disowned her for the scandal. Lady Vivienne understood the full truth of what happened between us, and yet chose, years later, to use a distorted version of that old story as a weapon against my marriage to her stepdaughter, motivated by resentment carried since her own failed prospects with my family long ago." Lady Vivienne's composed expression finally cracked under the weight of public exposure, her face draining of color as murmurs of shock and disbelief spread through the gathered crowd. "This is preposterous," she said, though her voice carried far less conviction than her earlier confidence. "Slanderous accusations with no basis." "We have written testimony from Edmund Whitmore himself," Serafina interrupted, her voice clear and steady despite the nerves fluttering beneath her composure, "detailing the full history between our families and Lady Vivienne's motivations for the cruelty she orchestrated at our engagement celebration. I believe several of you witnessed that cruelty firsthand, when my stepsister announced false and humiliating claims about my husband in front of the entire assembled company." All eyes turned toward Camilla, who stood near the edge of the crowd, her expression a mixture of nervousness and resolve. She stepped forward, drawing a steadying breath before speaking. "It's true," she said, her voice carrying with surprising strength despite the difficulty of the admission. "My mother instructed me to spread that rumor, told me it was simple truth everyone already suspected. I did not understand until recently that she had constructed the entire story deliberately, using an old scandal from the Duke's past as a template for cruelty she had been planning for years. Lady Vivienne turned toward her daughter with an expression of betrayed fury. "How dare you?" "I dare because I am done being your instrument," Camilla said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I spent years believing your cruelty toward Serafina was simple jealousy, ordinary family rivalry. I did not understand until now how deliberately calculated your schemes have truly been, how willing you were to sacrifice my reputation and character to serve your own bitter ambitions." The room fell into stunned silence, broken only by the soft murmur of whispered conversations as guests began processing the full magnitude of what they had just witnessed. Lady Vivienne looked around at the assembled crowd, searching for allies who might rally to her defense, but found only faces reflecting varying degrees of shock, disgust, and dawning understanding. "I believe," Alistair said quietly, addressing the room at large, "that this should put to rest any lingering doubts about the nature of my marriage to Serafina, or the truth behind the rumors spread before our wedding. Our union was never a sham, gentlemen, ladies. It was, and remains, a genuine partnership built now on honesty rather than the deceptions others sought to place between us." He turned to Serafina, and in front of the entire assembled crowd, took her hand and raised it gently to his lips, a public gesture of affection that carried far more weight than any formal declaration could have provided. "I am fortunate," he continued, his eyes remaining fixed on Serafina rather than the crowd around them, "to have married a woman of remarkable courage and integrity, who faced these difficult revelations not with fear, but with determination to uncover the truth alongside me. Whatever challenges brought us together, I find myself genuinely grateful for the partnership we have built in these past several days." Serafina felt warmth spreading through her chest at his words, at the sincerity evident in his expression, so different from the guarded distance that had characterized their earlier acquaintance. Whatever this marriage had begun as, whatever uncertainty and scandal had shadowed its earliest days, something genuine had grown between them through shared adversity, something she found herself increasingly grateful for as well. Lady Vivienne, recognizing the complete collapse of whatever plan she had constructed for the evening, made a hasty and humiliated retreat from her own gathering, leaving her guests to process the dramatic revelations without her presence to manage the narrative any further. The gathering continued. Though the atmosphere had shifted entirely, curious whispers now focused not on doubting the Duke's marriage, but on marveling at the dramatic scandal that had just unfolded before their eyes. Several guests approached Serafina and Alistair throughout the remainder of the evening, offering apologies for having entertained the earlier rumors, congratulations on their genuine union, and quiet admiration for the courage it had taken to address such difficult truths so publicly. As the evening finally began winding toward its conclusion, Serafina found herself standing on the terrace outside the ballroom, breathing in the cool night air, processing the whirlwind of revelation and vindication that had defined the past several hours. "You were remarkable in there," Alistair said, joining her at the terrace railing. "We were remarkable," Serafina corrected gently. "This was not a battle either of us could have won alone." "No," he agreed, his hand finding hers once more. "I don't believe it was." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge more fully as the last light of evening faded entirely into night, both of them understanding that whatever challenges still remained ahead, whatever consequences Lady Vivienne would face for her actions, they had crossed some essential threshold together this evening, transforming a marriage built on convenience and misunderstanding into something far more genuine and enduring. The weeks that followed brought consequences neither swift nor entirely predictable, though each development seemed to confirm the wisdom of exposing Lady Vivienne's scheme so publicly, rather than allowing it to fester in whispered speculation. Word of the gathering spread quickly through the county, embellished with each retelling until Serafina barely recognized the dramatic tale circulating among the nobility as the same evening she had actually experienced. Regardless of exaggeration, the essential truth remained intact, and Lady Vivienne found herself increasingly isolated as former friends and social connections distanced themselves from the scandal now attached to her name. "She's requested a meeting," Alastair told Serafina one morning, several weeks after the gathering, holding a letter that had arrived with the morning post. "Lady Vivienne, I mean. She wishes to discuss the financial arrangements connected to your father's estate." Serafina felt a familiar tension settle in her shoulders at the mention of her stepmother. What could she possibly want to discuss now, after everything that's happened? "I suspect," Alastair said carefully, "that her financial circumstances have grown considerably more difficult since the scandal became public. Several of her creditors have apparently grown less patient, now that her social standing no longer provides the same protection it once did." Serafina considered this information for a long moment. Despite everything, despite years of cruelty and the elaborate scheme that had nearly destroyed her marriage before it truly began, she found herself feeling something unexpected. Not quite sympathy, but perhaps a reluctant understanding of how thoroughly Lady Vivienne's own choices had finally caught up with her. "I think we should meet with her," Serafina said finally. "Not to offer forgiveness she hasn't earned, but to address the practical matters that remain, and perhaps to finally close this chapter properly, on our own terms rather than leaving it to linger unresolved." The meeting took place at Alastair's estate rather than Lady Vivienne's own household, a subtle assertion of the shifted power dynamic between them. Lady Vivienne arrived alone, without Camilla's presence, looking considerably diminished from the composed, confident woman who had once dominated every room she entered. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," she said, settling into the chair Alastair indicated, her voice carrying none of its former haughty confidence. "What did you wish to discuss?" Alastair asked, his tone polite but carefully guarded. "My financial circumstances have grown difficult," Lady Vivienne admitted, the confession clearly costing her considerable pride. "Several creditors have called in debts I had previously managed to defer through social connections that no longer serve me as they once did. I find myself facing the possibility of losing what remains of my late husband's estate entirely." Serafina studied her stepmother's face, searching for manipulation beneath the apparent vulnerability, but found instead something that looked genuinely like exhaustion and defeat. "I understand you have little reason to offer me any assistance," Lady Vivienne continued, "given everything that has happened between us. But I find myself with few other options remaining, and Camilla's future remains tied to whatever resources survive this difficult period." "Camilla has been staying with us these past weeks," Serafina said quietly. "Did you know that?" Lady Vivienne's expression flickered with surprise. "I did not. She's been helping us understand the full scope of what happened, cooperating fully with whatever questions we've had," Serafina continued. "In the process, she's begun building a life somewhat separate from the schemes and manipulations that defined her upbringing under your guidance. I believe she's found something like genuine friendship with Charlotte, and has expressed interest in pursuing interests entirely her own, rather than those dictated by your ambitions for her future." "You've taken my daughter from me," Lady Vivienne said, though the accusation lacked real fire, sounding more like weary acceptance than genuine anger. "I've given her an opportunity to choose her own path," Serafina corrected gently. "Whether she chooses to maintain relationship with you moving forward remains entirely her decision, not mine." Lady Vivienne was quiet for a long moment, processing this information alongside the collapse of her financial circumstances and social standing. "What do you intend to do about my current difficulties?" she asked finally. Alastair and Serafina exchanged a glance, having discussed this exact possibility in the days leading up to the meeting. "We're prepared to offer a modest settlement," Alastair said, "sufficient to ensure you maintain basic comfort and security, though certainly not the lavish lifestyle you previously enjoyed. This offer comes with conditions, however." "What conditions?" Lady Vivienne asked warily. You will make no further attempts to interfere with our marriage, or with Camilla's future choices, whatever those choices might be, Serafina said firmly. You will also provide a full, honest accounting of the scheme you orchestrated, including any additional details that might help us understand whether other families have suffered similarly from your manipulations over the years. Lady Vivienne's expression tightened, old pride warring visibly with practical necessity. And if I refuse these conditions, then you face your financial difficulties entirely alone, Alistair said simply, without whatever assistance we might otherwise provide. The silence that followed stretched long enough that Serafina began to wonder if her stepmother's pride would win out over practical need. But finally, Lady Vivienne's shoulders sagged with something that looked like genuine surrender. I accept your conditions, she said quietly. I am tired, Serafina, tired of carrying resentment I've held since long before you were even born. Perhaps it's time I finally set aside whatever ambitions and grudges have defined my life these past years, and accept whatever more modest peace remains available to me now. Something in her voice, weary and genuinely humbled, made Serafina believe, for the first time, that whatever transformation her stepmother now claimed might actually carry some measure of sincerity. I hope you find that peace, Serafina said, and found she meant it despite everything. Lady Vivienne departed shortly after, the settlement details to be finalized through solicitors in the coming days, leaving Serafina and Alistair alone once more in the quiet drawing room where so many difficult conversations had unfolded over the past several weeks. Do you think she's truly changed? Alistair asked. I don't know, Serafina admitted, but I think perhaps it doesn't matter entirely. Whatever she does moving forward, we've ensured she no longer holds power to threaten our happiness or Camilla's future. That feels like sufficient resolution, even if her heart remains unchanged. Camilla's own transformation, in the weeks that followed, proved considerably more genuine and complete. Freed from her mother's manipulative influence, she began developing interests and friendships entirely her own, spending considerable time with Charlotte, who introduced her to charitable work supporting families facing financial hardship, similar to what Serafina's own family had experienced after her father's death. I never understood how much of my cruelty toward you was simply inherited from watching my mother's example, Camilla admitted to Serafina one afternoon, as they walked together through the estate gardens. I think I convinced myself that treating you poorly somehow protected me from becoming the target of similar cruelty myself. It's taken me far too long to understand how misguided that belief truly was. We can't change the past, Serafina said gently. But I think we can build something better moving forward, if we're both willing to try. I would like that, Camilla said, something genuine and hopeful entering her expression for the first time since Serafina had known her. I think I would like that very much. Their growing friendship, tentative but genuine, became one of the unexpected gifts to emerge from the difficult weeks following the wedding. Serafina found herself grateful for the sister she had never truly had, now finally beginning to develop through mutual understanding rather than inherited rivalry. Meanwhile, her relationship with Alistair continued deepening in ways neither of them had anticipated when they first entered into what both had understood as primarily an arrangement of convenience. The careful distance that had once characterized his behavior toward her had entirely dissolved, replaced by genuine warmth and consideration that grew more evident with each passing day. I find myself curious about something, Serafina said one evening as they sat together in the drawing room following dinner, a comfortable domestic routine that had developed naturally over the preceding weeks. When we first married, you seemed so guarded, so careful to maintain distance between us. What changed? Alistair considered the question thoughtfully before answering. I think, initially, I approached our marriage the same way I had approached every relationship since Margaret's departure, expecting eventual disappointment or betrayal, protecting myself by maintaining careful distance rather than risking genuine vulnerability again. And now, he said, his expression softening as he met her eyes directly. "I find that the vulnerability I once feared has instead brought unexpected reward. You faced the truth of my past with courage rather than judgment. You fought alongside me against my enemies rather than retreating from difficulty. You've shown me, through your actions rather than mere words, that trust need not always lead to betrayal." Serafina felt warmth spreading through her chest at his words, recognizing in them an echo of her own growing feelings. Feelings that had developed so gradually she had scarcely noticed their depth until this moment of honest reflection. "I find myself grateful," she said softly, "for whatever circumstances brought us together, however difficult and complicated our beginning may have been." "As do I," Alistair agreed, reaching across the space between them to take her hand gently. "I confess I did not expect, when we first exchanged vows beneath such uncertain circumstances, to find myself falling genuinely in love with the woman I had married." The word hung in the air between them, tender and unexpected, and Serafina felt her breath catch at the sincerity evident in his expression. "I believe," she said carefully, "that I have been falling in love with you as well, somewhere amid all the difficulty and revelation of these past several weeks." Something warm and hopeful passed between them, a genuine connection that felt entirely separate from the scandal and manipulation that had once threatened to define their marriage before it had truly begun. Whatever challenges still remained ahead, whatever consequences continued unfolding from Lady Vivienne's exposed scheme, Serafina found herself facing the future with a confidence and hope she had not expected to feel when she first walked down that aisle beneath the weight of her stepsister's cruel words. The rumors that had once threatened to define her marriage had instead become the very foundation upon which something genuine and lasting had been built, tested by adversity and strengthened through honest partnership rather than convenient pretense. 6 months passed, transforming the tentative partnership Serafina and Alistair had built into something neither of them had imagined possible during those first uncertain days of their marriage. The estate, once quiet and formal under Alistair's careful management, had grown warmer under Serafina's influence, filled now with the sounds of genuine laughter and easy conversation that had been entirely absent before her arrival. Camilla visited regularly, her friendship with Serafina having grown into something genuine and comfortable, entirely different from the rivalry that had once defined their relationship. She had begun courting a young solicitor she met through her charitable work, a gentle, thoughtful man named Edward who valued her intelligence and growing independence rather than seeking to control or diminish it. Lady Vivienne, true to the conditions of their settlement, had retreated into a considerably more modest lifestyle, living quietly in a small cottage on the outskirts of the county. Serafina received occasional letters from her, brief and formal, but increasingly free of the manipulative undertones that had once characterized every interaction between them. Whether genuine transformation or simple pragmatic acceptance of circumstances beyond her control, Lady Vivienne no longer posed any threat to the happiness Serafina had finally found. It was during the county's annual autumn festival, a grand celebration that drew nobility from across the region, that the final, unexpected chapter of their story unfolded, one that would settle any lingering doubt about the genuine nature of their marriage once and for all. The festival traditionally concluded with a formal ball, hosted this year at the grandest estate in the county, drawing nearly every prominent family within traveling distance. Serafina dressed carefully for the occasion, a beautiful gown of deep blue silk that Alistair had commissioned specifically for the event, a thoughtful gesture that had become characteristic of their relationship in the months since their difficult beginning. "You look radiant," Alistair said, meeting her at the base of the staircase as she descended, his eyes carrying warmth that had once seemed entirely foreign to his careful, guarded expression. "You're not so bad yourself," Serafina teased, taking his offered arm as they prepared to depart for the evening's festivities. The ballroom, when they arrived, buzzed with the particular energy that accompanied the season's most anticipated social event. Guests eager to see and be seen, to exchange gossip and forge connections that might shape the coming year's social calendar. Serafina noticed, with quiet satisfaction, that the whispers following her and Alistair through the crowd carried none of the cruel speculation that had once accompanied their appearances together. Instead, curious glances now carried genuine admiration, interest in the couple whose dramatic story had captivated county gossip for months. As the evening progressed, Alistair grew increasingly quiet, a subtle nervousness entering his usually composed demeanor that Serafina noticed but could not quite explain. "Is something troubling you?" she asked during a lull between dances, studying his expression with growing curiosity. "Not troubling exactly," he said, a small smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "But I do have something I wish to share with you tonight, something I've been planning for several weeks now." Before she could ask him to elaborate, the orchestra concluded its current piece, and Alistair raised his hand to request a brief pause from the conductor, drawing curious attention from the assembled guests as he led Serafina toward the center of the dance floor. "What are you doing?" Serafina whispered, uncertainty mixing with curiosity as every eye in the ballroom turned toward them. "Something I should have done months ago," Alistair said quietly, before turning to address the assembled crowd, his voice carrying clearly through the suddenly quiet ballroom. "Many of you witnessed the difficult beginning of my marriage," he began, "the cruel rumors that threatened to define our union before it had truly begun, and the scandal that followed as truth finally emerged regarding those false accusations. I wish tonight, in front of the same community that witnessed those difficult early days, to make clear something that I believe has become evident to anyone who has watched our marriage develop these past several months." He turned to face Serafina directly, taking both her hands in his expression carrying a sincerity that made her breath catch despite the public setting. "When I married you, Serafina, I did so believing our union would remain a practical arrangement, useful to both our families, but devoid of the genuine affection I had long ago convinced myself I would never again allow myself to feel. I was wrong. In the months since that difficult beginning, you have shown me courage in the face of scandal, loyalty in the face of manipulation, and a capacity for genuine love that has utterly transformed my understanding of what our marriage could become." Murmurs of surprise and curiosity rippled through the assembled crowd, guests leaning forward eagerly to witness whatever declaration was unfolding before them. "I love you," Alistair continued, his voice steady despite the public vulnerability of the moment. "Not out of obligation, not simply out of the practical arrangement that first brought us together, but genuinely, completely, in ways I did not believe myself capable of feeling again after the pain of my past. I wish tonight, in front of this community, to make that love entirely clear, beyond any doubt or speculation that might otherwise linger." He released one of her hands to reach into his coat pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box that drew audible gasps from the surrounding crowd. Opening it, he revealed a stunning ring, far more elaborate and personal than the simple wedding band they had exchanged during their hurried ceremony months earlier. "This was my mother's ring," he explained, his voice growing softer, more intimate despite the public setting. "She wore it throughout a marriage built on genuine love and partnership, qualities I did not believe I would ever find for myself after everything that happened with Margaret all those years ago. I wish for you to wear it now, not as a replacement for our original wedding band, but as an additional symbol of the genuine love that has grown between us, distinct from whatever practical circumstances first brought us together." Serafina felt tears gathering in her eyes as she accepted the ring, understanding fully the significance of this gesture, this public declaration that erased any remaining doubt about the genuine nature of their marriage. "I love you too," she said softly, though her voice carried clearly enough for those nearest them to hear. "More than I ever imagined possible, given how uncertain and difficult our beginning truly was." As Alistair slipped the ring onto her finger, the ballroom erupted into spontaneous applause, guests moved by the genuine emotion evident in the exchange they had just witnessed. Even those who had once whispered cruel speculation about their marriage now watched with evident admiration, any lingering doubt about the authenticity of their union thoroughly dispelled by this public, heartfelt declaration. Camilla, watching from near the edge of the ballroom with Edward at her side, wiped tears from her own eyes, genuinely moved by the transformation she had witnessed in her stepsister's marriage over the preceding months. "I never imagined I would live to see such genuine happiness for her," she murmured to Edward, "especially not after everything my mother and I put her through." "People can change," Edward said gently, squeezing her hand. "You've certainly proven that yourself these past months." As the orchestra resumed playing, Alastair pulled Serafina into a dance, the crowd around them parting respectfully to give the couple space for this clearly meaningful moment. They moved together with an ease and familiarity that had developed gradually over months of genuine partnership, each glance between them carrying warmth that needed no further words to convey. "You stunned the entire ballroom," Serafina said softly as they danced, still processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. "I meant to," Alastair admitted with a small smile. "I wanted every person who once doubted our marriage, who once believed the cruel rumors spread before our wedding, to witness beyond any doubt the genuine love that has grown between us. I wanted this county to remember tonight not as another chapter in old scandal, but as confirmation of everything true and good that our marriage has become." "You've certainly accomplished that," Serafina laughed softly, glancing around at the still beaming faces of guests who continued watching them with evident delight and admiration. The remainder of the evening passed in a warm blur of celebration, guests approaching throughout the night to offer congratulations and warm wishes. The earlier scandal that had once threatened to define their marriage now thoroughly transformed into a story of triumph over adversity, genuine love conquering deliberate cruelty and manipulation. As the ball finally concluded, and they prepared for the carriage ride home, Serafina found herself reflecting on the remarkable journey that had brought her to this moment. From the humiliation of Camilla's cruel words at her engagement party to this evening's public, heartfelt declaration of genuine love. "Do you regret any of it?" she asked Alastair as their carriage rolled through the moonlit countryside toward home. "The difficulty of our beginning, the scandal we had to overcome together." Alastair considered the question thoughtfully before answering. "I regret the pain it caused you, certainly, the humiliation and uncertainty you suffered through no fault of your own. But I cannot regret the journey itself, because it brought us to this moment, to a partnership, and love I would not trade for any easier, more conventional beginning we might have had instead." Serafina leaned against his shoulder, watching the countryside pass by in comfortable silence, feeling a contentment and security she had not believed possible during those difficult early days of scandal and uncertainty. "I feel the same way," she said softly. "Whatever difficulty brought us here, I find myself grateful for the marriage we've built together, genuine and strong despite everything that once threatened to tear it apart before it had truly begun." As their carriage finally arrived home, the estate quiet and peaceful beneath the star-filled autumn sky, Serafina felt certain that whatever challenges the future might still bring, she would face them alongside a partner who had proven, beyond any doubt, the depth and sincerity of his commitment to their shared life together. The rumors that had once threatened to define their marriage as a sham, built on false pretense and hidden shame, had instead become the very foundation of a love story that would be remembered throughout the county not for scandal and cruelty, but for the remarkable triumph of genuine partnership over deliberate deception, and the powerful truth that sometimes the most difficult beginnings lead to the most enduring and genuine happiness. A year after the autumn ball, the estate welcomed a new addition that brought even greater joy to a household already transformed by genuine partnership and hard-won happiness. Serafina gave birth to a daughter, a small, healthy girl with her mother's steady gaze, and as Alastair often remarked with quiet delight, her father's tendency toward thoughtful silence before speaking. They named her Margaret, a choice that surprised many among the county's nobility given the painful history attached to that name, but one that Alastair explained carefully to anyone curious enough to ask. "I wish to reclaim something good from a story that once brought me only pain," he said. Margaret deserved better than to be remembered solely through scandal and loss. Perhaps this small gesture helps restore some measure of dignity to her memory. Edmund Whitmore, informed of the gesture through a carefully worded letter from Alastair, responded with genuine gratitude, expressing that he could think of no more fitting tribute to the woman he had loved and lost. He continued teaching at his village schoolhouse, occasionally exchanging correspondence with Alastair that had, over time, developed into something like careful friendship. Two men bound together by shared history, finally finding peace with circumstances neither had chosen, but both had learned to accept. Camilla married Edward the following spring, a modest but genuinely joyful ceremony that Serafina attended as her stepsister's chosen witness, a role that would have seemed impossible to imagine during the years of rivalry and cruelty that had once defined their relationship. Watching Camilla exchange vows with a man who clearly cherished her intelligence and independence, Serafina felt genuine happiness for the sister she had never expected to gain through such difficult circumstances. Lady Vivienne attended the wedding as well, considerably humbled by the intervening years, though something in her expression suggested she had finally found a measure of peace with her more modest circumstances. She approached Serafina briefly during the reception, her demeanor careful and uncertain in a way that felt entirely foreign to the confident, manipulative woman who had once dominated every interaction between them. "Your daughter is beautiful," she said quietly, glancing toward where baby Margaret slept peacefully in her nurse's arms nearby. "I hope she grows up in a household filled with more genuine warmth than the one I provided for you and Camilla." "She will," Serafina said simply, though something in her tone carried neither bitterness nor complete forgiveness, merely quiet acceptance of the complicated history that had shaped all their lives so profoundly. "Thank you for coming today, and for honoring the conditions of our arrangement these past years." "It was the least I could do," Lady Vivienne said, "given everything my choices cost this family over the years." As the wedding celebration continued around them, Serafina found Alastair watching her from across the room, his expression carrying the same warmth and devotion that had characterized their relationship since that transformative autumn ball years earlier. She excused herself from her conversation with Lady Vivienne and made her way toward her husband, taking his offered hand as they watched Camilla and Edward share their first dance as a married couple. "It's remarkable," Alastair murmured. "How much has changed since that terrible night at your engagement party, when Camilla's cruel words seemed poised to destroy everything before it had truly begun." "It is," Serafina agreed, leaning contentedly against his shoulder. "Though I find myself grateful, strange as it sounds, for the journey that brought us here. Without that cruelty, without the scandal and difficult revelations that followed, I don't know that we would have built the genuine partnership we now share." "Perhaps that's the truest lesson in all of this," Alastair said thoughtfully. "That sometimes the most painful beginnings create space for the most genuine and enduring happiness, if we're brave enough to face difficulty, honestly rather than retreating into convenient silence or comfortable deception." Their daughter stirred in her nurse's arms nearby, and Alastair moved to gently lift her, cradling little Margaret against his chest with a tenderness that had become second nature over the past months of fatherhood. Serafina watched them together, her husband and daughter, feeling a profound gratitude for the life they had built despite everything that had once threatened to tear it apart before it truly began. The county, in the years that followed, would remember the story of Duke Alastair Thorne and his wife Serafina not for the cruel rumors that once threatened to define their marriage, but for the remarkable resilience and genuine love that had ultimately triumphed over deliberate deception and manipulation. Young couples entering their own arranged marriages would often reference their story as proof that genuine partnership could grow from even the most uncertain and difficult beginnings, provided both partners remained willing to face truth honestly rather than hiding behind convenient pretense. As for Serafina herself, she found that the humiliation of that terrible night, when Camilla's cruel words had seemed poised to define her entire future, had instead become merely the first difficult chapter in a story that had ultimately led to greater happiness and fulfillment than she had ever dared imagine possible. The scandal that once threatened everything had instead revealed the genuine character of the man she had married, the strength she herself possessed to face adversity with courage rather than despair, and the surprising capacity for growth and redemption that existed even within relationships once defined entirely by cruelty and rivalry. Their marriage, forged initially through practical necessity and nearly destroyed by deliberate manipulation, had instead become something far more valuable than either had anticipated on that uncertain wedding day. A genuine, enduring partnership built on honesty, courage, and love that had proven strong enough to overcome whatever difficulty life continued to present in the years that followed. And on quiet evenings, when Serafina found herself reflecting on the remarkable journey that had brought her to this contented life, she often thought back to that brief exchange in the garden on the night of her engagement party, when a stranger's quiet words had offered unexpected comfort amid overwhelming humiliation. She had not known then that the stranger was Alistair himself, escaping the very party where his reputation was being so cruelly discussed, seeking a moment of peace before facing whatever difficult conversations still awaited him. Not yet, he had told her that night when she asked if she knew him, but you will. Looking back now, surrounded by the genuine happiness and partnership they had built together against such considerable odds, Serafina understood that his words had carried more truth and promise than either of them could have possibly imagined in that brief, uncertain moment in the garden. Long before either truly understood the remarkable story their lives together were about to become.